Good afternoon, everybody. Half full or half empty? How many people think this is half full? Okay. How many people think it's half empty? In fact, there is a correct answer. And the answer is that it is completely full. It is half full of liquid and half full of air. It turns out that the optimists are right. This will be very important because as we hear, and some of you might be thinking, well, we're in a small country, how on earth can we be worth a billion-dollar company? How can we sort of create incredible things out of nothing? It turns out that it has never been easier to create global companies out of practically nothing. I'll just share a little bit about my story and then I'll get into the scaling world. So I have a software background. I ended up doing a PhD because my girlfriend wanted to do a PhD and I didn't want to work. I ended up meeting my professor. So I used to be a good student, but I was sort of kind of always late and I would always manage to ace the work at the last minute. My professor invited me in to have a little interview before I did a PhD. And then he thought, well, okay, I actually need some help. And then half an hour later, I was meeting the general manager of Intel. And I managed at the end of that hour to not only start doing a PhD, but have Intel pay for me to do it. And I was one of the first people in the world to use server log data to see how people were actually using computers. Now, the company that I created after that, called Imaginatic, doing collaborative problem solving, I took public on the London Stock Exchange in 2006. So I've done through the whole IPO process. But what I find fascinating is that it has never been easier to do companies today, irrespective of where they're based, to do big, huge things. And so what I'll be telling you today is about scaling. But first of all, I just want to check here. Who here would like to get whatever they want? No, not really? Nobody? Really? That's my slides. Okay, he's put in two hands. I'll tell him then. So to get whatever you want is actually very simple. You need to do three things. The first thing is you need to know what it is that you want. Now, if you don't know what you want, that might be the thing that you're looking for. But you need to know what you want, and at this point, I would say be very careful what you wish for. I remember as a teenager reading one of these sort of scary books, and it was about a young boy who had decided that he wanted to be rich. The next morning, he woke up and found out his parents had been killed in a car crash, and he'd inherited everything. Be very careful what you wish for. But now once you've decided that you actually want to do a big thing, and I would like to, by the way, change the entire world for better, all of it, at the same time, ideally without anybody knowing that it's me, so shh. I'm in year 8 of a 25-year plan, and I've done some interesting things on the way. But the next thing then, once you've worked out what it is that you want, is you need to give yourself a time frame. Because this concentrates the mind. So I tend to use birthdays for my time frame, and I like numbers. So at the moment in my new business, I've decided that I'd like to be worth 50 million euros in 5 years' time with 5 million in the bank. And what's interesting, as soon as you have that time frame, and as soon as you have that end goal, it concentrates the mind, and things become relevant and irrelevant. So it allows you to really, really focus. But the third thing, and this actually shows how weird the world is you need to tell as many people as possible what it is that you want. Because it turns out in the world of abundance, the more people that you tell, the more likelihood there is that you will find somebody who will be able to help you. So this just beginning, we've learned that the optimists are right, and that if you have a really big vision, tell as many people as possible what it is, and then you can start achieving big things. Now, at this point now, I'm going to do a case study. You might not think this case study is directly relevant for you as startups, but I can guarantee you that it is. And this case study is going to be on one of the world's best-selling books. What do you think that is? The Bible? No. Not Harry Potter? No. Okay, I'm just scaling. This, sadly, is one of the world's best-selling books of all human history. 50 Shades of Grey. How many of you will admit to having read it? It's okay, it's dark, we can't see. It is an appallingly badly written book. It is practically unreadable. And yet, it has sold 125 million copies, And the movie itself is, I think, in the top 50 grossing movies of all human history. And what is fascinating about this book, so if you don't know about the book, it's basically an office romance with whips and chains. Like Google Office style, I don't know. So what's interesting with this book is that we might immediately think, well, okay, maybe the book is successful because the book is about sex. Well, what is interesting is that up until her book was produced, the next best-selling book about sex had sold 1 million copies. Her book sold almost 40 million copies in 3 months. So right now, her book is not successful because of the content, and it is genuinely an unreadable book. But it turns out she did what I call scaling. So she did small, smart moves. She did a series of things that in order managed to build up to make this thing one of the outstanding successes of human history for business. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these things, and I'll teach you some of the lessons that you can include to build up your own scaling plans. But in the meantime, let's go into the case study. So Erica Leonard is the author, married, she has a teenage son, and she's been doing film producing. She had never written anything in her entire life. Perhaps obvious once we read the book. One Christmas, she was given the set from Twilight. So I guess more of us would admit to at least seeing a Twilight movie. So Twilight is an extremely successful franchise. So it's fairly obvious that if you're buying a Christmas present for somebody, you'd pick a book that's on the top 10 list. Well, that already describes what's called a power law. It means that there are some times if you have like sort of pretty much allow things to emerge, some things become spectacularly successful, and because they're successful, but they become even more successful. What she decided to do, she decided to write what's called fan fiction. So fan fiction is a somewhat lazy form of fiction, but you can kind of see it has some merit. This would be, let's say you really like Harry Potter, and you really like the Weasley character. Well, now, in one version of this, you might then create another life or another version of Ron Weasley. So what was Ron Weasley like when he was 3 years old? But there's another type of fan fiction, which is the one that Erica Leonard did, which is called alternate universe fan fiction. This is where you take the same characters and you transplant them. So you might decide that Ron Weasley is an astronaut. In her case, she took the Twilight character, and she pretty much turned Edward and Bella into a multi-billionaire and a ditzy journalist. So, alternate universe. Well, at this point then, she spent about 8 months writing, and then she discovered fanfic.net and Twilighted. So these are 2 crowdsourcing platforms for sharing content. And what it allowed you to do is then take advantage of the power of the crowd. Now, very quickly, I mean, Twilight doesn't have any sex in it. Her book had lots and lots of sex. Many of the chapters were actually copied, I've understood, from pornography sites where she basically sort of re-edited other people's work. But what she was able to do was then start sharing the story. She managed to get 37,000 comments from people from around the world. Another thing, so I build software, and so I have beta users, so people that test out the software and give feedback. Well, in the book world, you can have beta readers. These are people that took the time to read through the book and then offer comments, suggestions. For example, she'd never been to the United States, and she was writing about a couple between Aspen and Seattle. Well, some of the readers would correct her to say, look, they'd never go to a Starbucks, they'd go to a Pete's Coffee. So she was able to take advantage of the power of the crowd. Even, for example, the title of the book, 50 Shades of Grey. In chapter 14, now I admit I've only read the first 12 chapters because I find the book unreadable. But skipping ahead to chapter 14, there's a moment when Anna wants to stroke Christian, her lover, and he says, don't touch me because I'm 50 shades of fucked up. The fans loved this, so she begins to repeat it over and over again. So the book that she'd started writing that was initially called Master of the Universe, when it came time to change the title had been chosen by the crowd, 50 Shades of Grey. The next thing that she did is that she hadn't finished writing the book. So one of the very powerful things she did at an early stage was actually synchronize her audience. Every week, she would produce another chapter, and she would publish it online, and then it would also be pushed out through a Facebook group as well. What it meant was that her fans began to get used to the content. In fact, if you read the Facebook comments, she went on holiday for 2 weeks, and people were frantic. Where's the next chapter? In addition, she wrote the book like a TV novella, like a soap opera. At the end of the chapter, you have to read the next one. I've interviewed women that have shared that they've missed airplane rides because they've been so busy reading that they've missed that their plane was leaving the gate. Because it's written in a very addictive format. But there, the idea, if you're trying to grow a big network and scale, is you synchronize. You get people to almost like get a heartbeat and a rhythm to what you're trying to do. Now, when I look at scaling, I find that luck actually plays an important role. But the thing is, you can make your own luck. If I give an example from my career, I was a PhD student, I was working for Intel. My professor invited me to go to a conference. I was like 24 years old. At this conference, I know that somebody might meet me and I might have an interesting conversation. But how will they find me? Well, this became very easy. So I bought myself a red jacket, bright red jacket, Kenzo jacket. I then made sure that for the very first presentation, I've noticed that very often people are shy about asking the first question. Once people start asking questions, there's a huge queue, but very often, to be that first question is a very special moment. So as a 24-year-old student, I then made sure that I was at the front, wearing a red jacket, and I stood up and say, "Hi, my name is Mark Turrell, I'm doing my PhD at Cass Business School, and I'm working for Intel, and my question is blah, blah, blah." Sure. Well, already then, the people organizing the conference, my professor said, "Well, that was such a good question, we'd like to have you on the panel, because you seem to know more than everybody here." So now, bright red jacket, sitting on panel. At the end of that session, there were these two big Dutch guys. And they said, "Can we have a chat with you? Like, what have I done? I'm a 24-year-old student, what have I done, what have I done?" It turns out they were the chief technology officers for Philips and for Shell. And they said, "What you're talking about, we'd like you to do them for our company." So now, as a 24-year-old, all of a sudden I was earning $40,000 doing a project that I'd already done before. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that that was a lucky coincidence. And yet it was done on purpose. I didn't know who I would meet, but you can kind of engineer your own luck. Well, this is kind of what she did when we look at 50 Shades of Grey again. So there were three mothers. So after her book had been, it was still sort of online and for free, there were three mothers who wanted to raise money for a cancer charity for children. And the way they did this was by publishing an outtake chapter, like an extra chapter of the book. Well, in 3 weeks, the charity raises $80,000, and of that, $30,000 is for her single chapter. At this point, she has 100 chapters written and is thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to be a millionaire." So because of this lucky coincidence, she took advantage of it. She then found a deal with an independent publisher called the Writers Cafe from Australia, and she pulled it off the internet, so some of the fans were getting annoyed. But because it was so quick to go for print, so within 3 weeks it was already available, she was then able to take advantage to start actually making some money. Now at this point then, there's something a little bit weird that I found, because she ends up doing 16 perfect things, 16 perfect, small, smart moves. But what was weird was that there was no strategy behind it. I believe you should all design your plans, but she really just happened to get really, really lucky 16 times in a row. Well, in fact, the observation for how she managed to get lucky actually came from this. It's a tactic of scaling called network hubs. One of the ways of promoting a book is to do a book tour. So you get booked to go to different places and you meet journalists. Well, normally if you're getting a book published, it takes about a year to publish something. And there's a budget and everything is planned. Well, in her case, she was giving away her book for free. Then all of a sudden, she does the deal in August and the book is published in September. And there's no time and there's no money to do a book tour. So what does she do? Well, it turns out she did the only sensible possible thing, and that was to do a virtual book tour. From her apartment in London, she appeared on 11 of the top book websites, Goodreads amongst others, and became the guest blogger, guest author. And within a single week, she was able to cover the entire market without leaving her apartment at zero budget. Well, this then became interesting because all of those sites were hubs. They were information hubs for people interested in books. Now she gets lucky again, because one of the women that saw this runs this website, Devolicious Moms. How many of you know Desperate Housewives? Sorry, I meant the TV show, not Desperate. These are the jokes. It's okay. So this is a website, Divalicious Moms. It's pretty much targeted for like this sort of Connecticut, East Coast audience. The woman who ran this thing managed to get a copy of the book, thought it was so great that she invited Erica Leonard to come to New York, and they had a meeting in a loft where she signed 200 copies of the book. The day after, copies of that signed book were selling for $700 on eBay. Well, because she was now in the hub, she was like in the center of publishing, she was able to get a 7-figure book deal, like $1 million plus book deal, within 4 weeks, because she managed to now live in the hub. Other things then, as a way of scaling, and this is a great tactic for many of you, there's a scaling technique called catching the wave. The idea is that there's always waves of things going on in the world. We don't know what they will be, but we want to jump on the wave when it arrives. To give you an example, let's say a sort of harrowing example, one of my friends runs a Dutch website called Love Matters, which is teaching sexuality to taboo countries like Iran, Pakistan, places that are very, very difficult to talk about this. And so what she found was that by pretty much, there's always going to be a traumatic story coming out of India. So the Indian folk, they pretty much wait for a traumatic story to happen, and then immediately they're there with a campaign, catching a wave when it exists. Well, what Erica Leonard was able to do is she caught the wave of ebooks, so Kindle readers. And in fact, in the United Kingdom, 50% of all sales of 50 Shades of Grey are on ebooks. And it means you can be looking at the BBC website, look at your email, and look at some hardcore pornography. Swipe, swipe, and nobody would know what's going on. By catching the wave. Other things then, so when the book got published, so she signed the 7-figure book deal with Random House. Well, Random House is an official, proper publisher. Because of that, it means that the New York Times could write about it. And this is a picture from 2 days before the book was launched. This is the book everybody is talking about. What that meant was that because the New York Times could write about it, the story became hugely amplified. That meant that CNN could cover it. Because after all, if you want to sell adverts, there's nothing better than a nice story about sex that you're allowed to talk about. Another interesting thing, if we look at this book, is that up until her, all of the books on sex had pictures of body parts and naked people. Well, this book is black with a tie on it. You can put this at the front of a supermarket and nobody will know what's in it. This is a way of making your idea very infectious to have it spread. Another thing then is that this became almost like a part of a great social movement. I met many, many women and did lots of interviews when I was writing this, and most people read it not because they sort of saw it on the bookshelf, but they were told by their friends, you have to read the book. Now, sometimes you have it when a friends say, look, you have to read the book, you have to read the book. Then you read it, the book is terrible, and you say, why did you tell me to read this terrible book? You said, yeah, I knew it was terrible as well, I just wanted you to have this terrible experience. But what it meant was that she was able to make her book extremely viral as content. Another thing then, we don't have time for the video, but I thoroughly recommend you do a little YouTube search for this thing. What you then do is she jumped into popular fiction. So this is a skit from a TV show in America, which is pretty much a pretend version of Mother's Day. And they're saying, well, as Mother's Day, you can give Mom the gift that she always wants. And this is a lady reading 50 Shades of Grey, sitting on a washing machine. I will say no more than that. The video will describe. And this is an example of riding the wave. So once you're actually going, you want to keep the momentum going. So you want to find as many things as you can to sort of keep picking up. And another example of riding wave is the movie, which came out on Valentine's Day. So right now, she was able to take advantage of the movie, even to the extent there was one actor who was meant to play the lead, and then after about 3 months, he dropped out. It's entirely plausible that he was never going to play the lead at all, but it kept the interest going for an extra 3 or 4 months so that people would still keep buying the book. But so let's look at this thing, and let's look at the thing from a startup perspective. I mean, she'd never written a book beforehand, and in 3 years' time, she's now worth, I think, about $220 million. She'd never written anything before. That book has now sold 125 million copies. This is a $1.2 billion plus business, and the movie itself made $500 million in just a few months of it coming out. This is a tremendous success. And for me then, some of the things that she did by accident, but many of them were done on purpose. And so in the book that I have, and welcome to talk to you about it afterwards, I believe that you guys, your startups, you should build scaling plans. Just as you have a business plan canvas, you should have a scaling canvas where you can take advantage of these different methods of scaling to build your own unique plans about creating something that's big, that delivers huge value to your customers and to yourself and your shareholders, that really can make a big difference. And so with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much. Remember, the optimist are right. You can get whatever you want. You can do huge things. And I'd like to say thank you very much for the invitation here. Thank you.